M&A TV is very pleased to be joined by Troy Paredes, founder of Paredes Strategies. Troy, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Let's hear a little bit from you about your company and what you do, your area of expertise.
So Paredes Strategies really occupies the space where finance, business, and government merge. One of the things you see increasingly post the financial crisis, Dodd-Frank and other legislative and regulatory developments, is the role of government in shaping business and finance. And so in terms of the needs that businesses face, in terms of the needs that the financial community faces, Paredes Strategy provides advisory services, strategic counseling and advice across an array of regulatory matters, governmental affairs matters, compliance matters, corporate governance, and the like.
Well, then let's delve into that just a little bit more. What have you seen as far as the SEC increasingly asserting itself?
Well, one of the things you've seen now for a handful of years is the Securities and Exchange Commission, where I had the privilege and honor to serve as a commissioner from 2008 to 2013, increasingly asserting itself into the corporate governance space in a whole host of respects. And in some sense, many people refer to as the increasing federalization of corporate law. Corporate law is traditionally thought to be the domain of the states. But what you see, to your question, is the SEC and the federal government more generally. It has roots in the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. We see it in the Dodd-Frank Act, where increasingly the federal government, in one way or another, legislatively or through regulatory developments at the SEC, becoming an increasingly significant player in terms of shaping corporate governance requirements that are impacting businesses of all shapes and sizes, and that certainly, as a result, has an impact on the M&A market too.
Let's talk a little bit about the politics then of the M&A market.
Well, an important question that comes up always when thinking about mergers and acquisitions and transactions of any sorts are who's going to be impacted as a result of a transaction taking place, or for that matter, as a result of a transaction not taking place. Life is complicated. At any business, at any company, there are a variety of stakeholders where the impacts are likely to differ. Not everybody, as a result of a transaction, will necessarily be better off. Without thinking about it explicitly in terms of winners and losers, when you think about the politics of M&A, two quick then points flow from what I just said. One is some parties may be better off and some parties may be worse off, and there can be a political dimension to that. But even more to the point, questions around short-termism, questions around activism, questions around the role of corporations in society and in our economy are getting increasing attention by political actors. We see discussions coming up even in terms of the presidential debate. And so I think this is an important consideration, even beyond the financial considerations, the economic considerations, is to think about the political dynamics of transactions and what one's political/regulatory as well as communication strategy is going to be when they're considering a transaction or considering fending off a transaction for one reason or another.
Yeah, the evolution of that really has been incredible of late. How about activist investing?
Yeah, well, activist investing is getting a lot of attention. It's certainly part of the M&A environment more broadly. When the discussion comes up, oftentimes the flavor feels as though there's a camp that falls into the activism bad and a camp that falls into the activism good. My approach is not to think about it in such a binary way and so categorically, but rather one has to parse and to get into the nitty-gritty. One can imagine instances where, as a result of any transaction, activist spurred or otherwise, it actually will be important to bringing a new strategy to bear, to furthering the sustainable growth of the business over the long term. Whereas in other instances, one can imagine circumstances where when an activist shows up, perhaps the activist is there to make a very quick profit that may potentially come at the expense of the company over the longer term and all of the shareholders. So I think what's important in these debates, be they policy debates, be they political discussions, regulatory or otherwise, is to not allow words like activism or short-termism or the like do the work, but to really think in a much more granular, nuanced way, informing one's judgments, again, as a policy matter, but also in terms of thinking about the regulatory and other dimensions to any of these discussions.
Troy, tremendous insight. Thank you so much for joining us today on M&A TV.
Thank you.
Happy to have you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.